This is another episode of the Sober Atheist podcast. By my count, I believe this is episode 7. And we are here with our Canadian friend, which is going to be the title of the podcast, with Michael Tingley.
Hello.
Hello. And Larry Knight.
Hello, John. Hello, Michael.
From the wonderful country of Canada. And Larry is well known to some of us that may be watching this, but not all of us who may be watching this. And I first met Larry in Austin, Texas, back in 2016 at the second Secular Recovery International Convention, and was fascinated by a presentation that he did there. And then we managed to introduce ourselves to each other and have been fast friends ever since. Larry joins Michael and myself and John C. in Paris for a meeting that we have every Sunday called Afternoon with the Atheists. But Larry's a most interesting individual and I think a great guest to have here on the podcast. So without a lot of further preliminaries, Larry, why don't we talk a little bit about, sobriety, Canada, what you've done, and other topics as they arise in the course of the conversation today. So over to you, my friend.
Sure. Well, I don't know where you exactly want to go with this, John. The beginning, you've introduced it as we met at Austin during the Depression days of the 2016 election. And I was giving a little talk. It was the first time I've given a talk, and it required to have an armed guard at the door, which was a little disconcerting to me. I'd never seen that. But my talk was an update on my activity regarding taking this organization called Alcoholics Anonymous to court with a human rights action that had upset a lot of apple carts. And I think they were a little concerned that there might be some folks that were not pleased with me or the organization in general that was there. And anyway, and I did. That's what I did. I basically updated people on that particular action. And yeah, we've been friends ever since. And I don't know if you want any more of the information. It was a successful action.
Tell us a little bit about the genesis of that action and why you took it and how it turned out.
Okay, well, where it all begins really is that I was living and working in Toronto and attending meetings all over the city, but mostly in the main core. And one of our young attendees at this AA meeting came over distraught, upset, in tears. He'd been seriously scolded by an AA member because he basically accused of sending people out to die because of his message, because he happens to be an agnostic or an atheist. And a couple of us were sitting there, and we absolutely listened to his experience. And we happened to know that with us that we also have the same experience, though we'd never been scolded like that. And we decided to do something about it. And so we started an agnostic meeting in downtown Toronto. And one of the things that came about in that process is that we edited the steps so that they would be not God-oriented. And we started a meeting, and it was going great guns. And then all of a sudden, somebody got wind of the fact that we had changed some steps or the wording of it. We didn't change any steps, but we softened the language, and we got booted out of our Toronto area intergroup, and had our membership revoked with their organization, and because we weren't AA, and I took it to task. We did go to meetings. We tried to resolve it. We waited a year, figured everything would do it the proper channels that are there. And that went absolutely nowhere. It went flat. And finally, before I lost the window of opportunity, because we do have, statutes of limitations on things, I had to jump in and I had to file an action with the Human Rights Commission. And I did that. And I had standing. That was an important aspect of it. And so we proceeded. And over a course of what eventually became 5 years, and adding the New York AA organization into the suit, sped things along. I mean, it really did speed things along. But we went to court with it.
And what were you actually suing for, Larry? What are the specifics there?
Well, you can't sue for anything if there aren't damages. And so the damages were somewhat financial. We had a number that we came up with that was reasonable. And we also wanted to be included and to make sure that we were in the publications, because they had literally removed us from their websites, and that we lost our exposure to the community of people who were suffering alcoholics. And we lost being one of the alternatives. And so we wanted to get that back. So that was a part of the how the settlement worked, in part. It was quite interesting. AA in New York was not nearly as hostile as people might think. They, I think, over time, with some wisdom and with their board of directors, understood that this has been a long time coming, that they've been at this risk for some time, and they just can't make any changes fast enough because the population just won't do that for them, won't support those changes. So they, in a way, became allies with us in the courtroom. Now, you have to know, I filed the application, and I was doing so with the understanding that I was going to be supported by the Legal Resource Center, which is given to complainants in Ontario. And they gave me maybe 5 minutes of phone calls, and they let me litigate on my own. I guess they felt very comfortable with my application, that I could manage the hearings. And so it was me and the world against all these high-powered lawyers. And I came out victorious and embarrassed the Toronto Intergroup, basically because I had to say, look, they're not even AA. They're acting on behalf of AA. They're not AA. They're pretending they are. They've taken AA's name. They don't have a legal right to do that. And it's clear, and I put all of the AA documents forward that shows that that's not possible or shouldn't be possible. And I explained that they were operating, I think the term is ultra-vires, beyond their capacity, in the wrong capacity. And they declared themselves at one point in the trial as being a religious organization, which was rather shocking, though not surprising to some people.
But that's what they are, Larry. That's what they all are.
No, they are.
All of them.
I agree that they are. The problem is, John, that the letters patent, which is what we call it, specifically show that they're not, and they are not to be.
That's the essential hypocrisy
and
which
that and
I
that was
finally had to totally reject.
and that is what they had to face in the courtroom, is the fact that they were operating one way and not the other, and they lost. And we settled. And in that first day of them going out to explain what had happened and update their community on it, they misrepresented the outcome of the entire case. They were notified the following morning, and we began the waiting period for things to be adjusted and amended. That did not happen. We went back into court for a breach of contract, and they were very much on the edge of being put sort of financially out of business. They finally complied, and the proper apologies were issued. The words were changed and altered so that people could function without getting a complete stomach ulcer. They were very hard. I mean, I could have pushed it harder, but I got them to bend over. It had been very difficult because one of their advisors, who was actually philosophically on our side, sadly had passed away during the negotiations, and which was a little tough. But we got through to the end, and things settled out, and I was victorious. The side effect, however, to all of this, and I think this is the more important part, is that originally when the lawsuit was filed, it got picked up by the news media basically worldwide, and it got carried as major stories, letting people know that there were alternatives to God in AA or in sobriety. There was an alternative, and very rapidly thereafter, we moved from, say, 50 meetings in North America to, I guess it got as high as at least 700 or perhaps 1,000 meetings around the world. And that was really exciting for our movement, and having an alternative so that people who are in doubt or people that had suffered under the hands of evangelicals would find a comfortable place to exercise community and support and connection with the recovery community, and that's where it was all coming about. The conference in Austin was the second one. I was hoping to be at the very first one in California. Unfortunately, that week that conference was happening, I had just filed the guest speaker with a subpoena, and I did not want to be there for that. That was I would be a little embarrassed.
Right. The Reverend.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just love the Reverend, you know.
But Dorothy had come all the way from California before that conference started, and came to Toronto and met with us and encouraged things to get this conference started, and they were just pushed on by this news. So it was a very it had some benefits.
Absolutely, but it's
unintended consequence.
Right, exactly. But it's such a strange situation, okay? Because this hybrid organization that emerged, which calls itself AA, really, in my opinion, isn't, never was, and never could be. The entire situation is illogical, in my opinion, because on the one hand, you have groups of atheists and agnostics vying for, and in some cases struggling for, sobriety and recognition. And on the other hand, you have an avowedly religious organization which by its nature supposedly tolerates atheists and agnostics,
right,
but really doesn't.
Right.
which
Right.
is what the distillation of the Toronto situation was. I think your efforts were heroic and rather marvelous, but at the same time, uh, taking legal action to be part of an organization which logically it's not supportable in terms
Oh,
of atheists and agnostics being a part of in the first place.
well, as
So
you
there's
know,
a
John,
lot of
none of
stuff.
it's logical anyway. So,
Right.
look, the idea that a bunch of drunks get together to help one another to not be drunk, that is also not particularly logical. So,
Well, it has its internal consistency in the
true.
sense that what we're talking about in essence in any recovery context
Yeah.
with real recovery is the word abstinence.
Well, there's abstinence, and there's hope, and there is belonging, and those things in concert can lead to a dramatic change in a person's life.
Right.
And we just
Hope
wanted
and
that to
belonging.
happen.
Right. Right. But
Shunning
this
is
whole
evil.
right. Well, you know, I wish we could live long enough to see logic prevail in the recovery world and recovery communities. But, you know, from the looks of us, I don't think any of us are going to make it all the way to the other side. One of the things I've been endeavoring to do since I first got involved in secular meetings in 1988. That's a long time ago.
That's right.
And when there were about 15 or 20 meetings maximum nationwide
Hmm.
and none overseas that we knew about.
Right.
But, you know, my own involvement in that organization, I've come to see in retrospect, my own personal involvement in that organization was in fact illogical, right? For many, many years. And it's taken me many, many years to come to a conclusion that any involvement with that organization is counterproductive for any atheist or agnostic. I don't know if that reflects your thinking at all, but that's where what some of your efforts helped lead me to,
Well,
bizarrely enough.
I had it a little differently. First of all, I'm not an apostate atheist.
Well,
I was raised vegetarian, John Michael, um, and
Yeah.
one of the requirements of that religion, that religious organization, is not a belief in God. As a matter of fact, when I was growing up, I would say well over 50% of the congregants were atheists or humanists, not even agnostics. They would sit much more firmly to the left. They came from the British tradition up in Canada, and it was definitely atheistic. And so I don't have that concept of a God in my life. I didn't have to rebuke that, or I didn't change my mind about it. And I think that a lot of the suffering that some people have with it are those that did come from a religious family originally, or that kind of a community. So I'm a little easier going about it. I don't care what somebody thinks. Just don't try to make me think it. I'm very much opposed to the dogma of anything, or any organization that has a creed that has these firm requirements. And anyway, I was just trying to make a community where I fit in, because I was told anybody fit in. So that's what I was up
Yeah,
to.
and that wasn't true.
Well, it was in my rooms. In
Right.
my
But
rooms, it
it's,
was
you know,
true.
globally, I see people struggling with this throughout the United States in places very different from your environment up there in Canada. Actually, I think you've got a number of connections in spots that are very different from your environment up there in Canada. Because you're a dual national, right?
That's correct.
Larry?
Yeah.
Okay, and you spend a fair amount of time visiting family and doing other things down here, unlike many of your countrymen up there.
Yeah.
So I think you're very well aware of the things that some of our fellow alcoholics and addicts have to go through who happen to be atheists in parts of the United States where they aren't tolerated at all.
Oh, no, exactly. And I'll say that has changed up here too. You know, I think once upon a time, Canada was a far more liberal and more comfortable organization, but it did change. I think the American fundamentalist movement took over the program a while back, and slowly it has entrenched itself and thrust itself on the whole organization, making it a more religious body. And I could watch the meetings, even up in Huntsville, Ontario, where I would go, we wouldn't hear any of this stuff or very little. And now you go in now and it's just thumping. It's just Bible pounding, which is, really quite sad. But that's something that they learned over time. There were a lot of organizations that were sort of subsets to AA that became very evangelical and tried to take over. Sort of like the Beach, that whatever his name Beach was.
Sandy Beach.
Sandy Beach, yeah.
I knew Sandy here in Washington.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So his kinds of organizations took off and invaded into Canada, and it changed. So I think it's part of the nature of the beast, though. I think religion likes to corrupt itself like that. And once it gets to a certain point, it just goes crazy.
Yeah, you have a very interesting take on things, because you're one of the people that was principally involved in trying to open up that organization to alternative recovery methods, basically, in an entire country. And when you attempted to do that, you got slapped down until the people up there were basically forced by statute and by circumstance and by pressure that was brought to bear from New York, from the international organization, to open up. And they basically gave lip service to that and did open up.
Yeah.
Correct?
They sidestepped the serious problem. We have a pretty strong code when it comes to human rights issues. And so they had clearly stepped outside of the bounds.
Yeah. Well, I'd be interested in hearing, while we have you here, where you think this whole thing is going in terms of organized, non-religious recovery within the context of groups that are constituted the way our secular groups are, where sharing and mutual support lead to abstinence without dogma. And where do you see that whole thing going in the future, just from your perspective?
Well, I believe that is the kind of thing that is the only thing that will last it out. I see any organization that embraces a creed and behaves in a dogmatic fashion will eventually force everybody out other than the one last remaining soldier. And so that the only organizations that will remain are those that actually deal with reasonable kinds of things, which is connection and community, mutual support, abstinence, of course, and use that as the touchstone for how they operate. And as long as they're not throwing any of the other stuff into it, they will survive that over the long haul. Will there be as many of them?
Yeah.
Maybe not, but it will last the time where the other ones will all fall apart ultimately.
Yeah.
Okay, let me ask a question.
Yep.
You know, you've said a couple of times now that any defining organizations that have a dogma.
Yeah.
And you know, I mean, we're used to the ritualistic aspect of traditional AA and NA. Well, isn't secular AA the same thing as just taking the word God out of the dogma? I mean, it's still all very ritualistic. In is based on the 12 steps, and why?
Well, I don't know.
Why leave it at that? I mean, are you comfortable with keeping it as an AA organization?
Well, first of all,
though it's a specialized AA organization, like a men's meeting or a women's meeting or a gay meeting. It's a secular meeting, but it's still AA.
okay, we're talking about dogma, we're talking about creed. And when we get to
Yeah.
those 2 points, we're talking about the 12 steps and as being the creed and the dogmatic
Right.
thing that you push. And as soon as you let go of this notion of having to do the 12 steps the way they're written, you don't have a problem because that's hooey anyway, right? It's a lie. The reason it was a lie, it works though, and it doesn't really work, but the reason it's put forward is people want to have something to do while they're suffering like hell in their first year. And they think that that's going to help them out. And it may make them feel better, but there's nothing miraculous about it. I think of the, you know, if you just do a couple of parts of that stuff, you will get the same benefit that you do from actually trying to pretend you can do all 12 steps anyway. So, like the self-examination is critical. And it's got to be thorough and it's got to be honest. And if you look at yourself for the first time in your life, you can come up with something that's going to be beneficial to how you're living and how you're feeling. And understand a lot of it is about how you're feeling. It's not about.
But isn't it possible to ignore that aspect of it and just go straight to abstinence and community?
You can do
without any of that self-examination or the 12-step program, all that stuff.
Sure it is. Sure it is. But not everybody, when they come in and stop drinking because of whatever crisis happened in their life at that moment, they're lost. They're not thinking logically. They don't understand the simplicity of you just have to stop drinking and not die, until you're feeling better. So it's about what else can I do that helps you feel a little bit better. And if you give somebody a sense of belonging, that's some relief right off the top because they've been rejected and they're self-rejecting themselves from the world at that point. They get a little relief from that. So it eases how they feel and it reduces conflict. It doesn't mean that that's the magic bullet, but that is the way that somebody gets a little bit of relief because it's hard to just stop. You know that. We all know that. That's why I didn't start drinking again because I hated the first time. It was so difficult. But that's my story.
Right. I mean, the stories of people I know who have stopped and stayed stopped for a long, long time, like we have actually, often involves getting to the very last gasp that you personally can take. I know in my own case, I never ever would have stopped unless I was absolutely desperate at the end. That's the only reason I ever stopped and became committed to staying stopped. And the way I did it, I immediately and categorically rejected their holy 12 steps. I took one look at that stuff and said, that's Jesus, okay? I'm not going to do that. I know that I had to stop, and I know that I had a problem, but what I latched onto was the power of example of people that I saw sitting in those meetings. Once I heard the stories, the before and after stories, that's what I could latch onto in terms of hope based on that community of my fellow suffering alcoholics.
So can you say that the 12 steps did not get you sober?
At all.
Yeah,
Okay.
I can say
So
that.
then why do
I
you
can
need a
say that.
secular 12 steps?
You don't need a secular 12
Yeah, you
steps.
don't need
It's
that.
Okay.
absolutely irrelevant
Yeah, I agree. They're irrelevant.
to any thinking person.
You
But wasn't
Now,
that what you were fighting for in Toronto, was to have a secular
well,
AA? I mean, secular 12 steps, right?
no, we were. Well, we were far newer than that in the sense that we wanted to be a meeting and we wanted to have some kind of a form that resembled all of the other meetings, that sort of felt like they were that, but with amended language that didn't include God. And people were most comfortable with that. And we did it by vote. So it wasn't, we didn't have the benefit of looking back at the experiment and seeing what was good about it or what was bad about it. We just started by making it look like a meeting, because that's where all of these people were coming from, so that they were still comfortable and relieved. And that's how that came about. We did ultimately just drop that in my meeting. We just dropped that stuff because it was just causing trouble. Anytime you talk
Yeah.
about it, there's 10 different ways of looking at any of those steps, and all of them are wrong. You know, it's what you take from whatever. It has nothing to do with somebody else's interpretation of what that stuff means. And that book was just a pile of, and we've been around. We understand that. Look at those 12 steps were there just as filler. The first 100 alcoholics in Alcoholics Anonymous, not a single one of them did 12 steps. They had a meeting and said, well, what did you do? Oh, well, this is what I did. This is what I did. And then somebody went and polished it up and made it, look all hoity-toity.
Well, do you still think it's necessary for the newcomer to have that kind of a rigid format in the beginning?
I don't think anybody needs to have that. No, I don't. Now that I've been through what I've been through, walk into any little group and you can sit down and you can form a common bond in the pursuit of relieving your own addiction or your alcoholism. And you can do that.
well,
And you don't need to follow that set plan. There isn't a set plan that gets you through it. What helps is being connected, having some hope, right? And not being shunned, not ostracized, and feeling comfortable, like you belong again in the world. Once you feel like your skin is okay to be in, you're halfway there. The best way to stay in that frame of mind is to not drink or use. You got to get sober. You got to get a clean thinking brain. That can take years.
yeah.
I'm almost halfway there now.
Well, yeah, that's detoxes can take a long time.
Oh, yeah.
But the thing that I see as being an essential issue and an essential problem with, many people that come and that disappear is the reason they disappear and they go back to drinking is that they have not made that final honest decision about it. And how can we possibly impart that information more efficiently to people that are just approaching us? All right. That we know that without that moment of decision that we had at the beginning, we never would have stayed.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have that moment, and that's the starting point. And it seems that people get hung up on other things other than the very most reductive and simplest proposition, which is making a decision, then figuring out where to go for help, which is meetings,
Yeah.
and sharing and trying to understand what abstinence is all about. But without that initial, I mean, they call Wilson called it his bright white light experience, right? When he's all hopped up on belladonna in Towns Hospital, he has his bright white light. Uh, you know, where do we go with that part, with helping the newcomer, without trying to instill some sort of dogma in them?
Oh, maybe we give them a little bottle of Benadryl. No, I'm just teasing. I think we talk about it openly, number one, but number two, and I got the reaction I was hoping to from you, John. I think one of the great inspiring things I experienced in my early days of recovery was to hear a room full of laughter down the hall.
Yeah.
And laughter is such an anesthetic, and it is so helpful at times. And to think I could get that back, because I think I really had lost a whole lot of that in my life. Such an important dimension in terms of how I was and how I feel. And I could get some laughter back. I could find something funny again on the face of it. I could find absurdity amusing instead of befuddling or annoying or whatever it is. And those kinds of little things, and they're just minor, they really were a big influence on wanting to go back and experiencing that momentary relief again at a very core level for me. I'm only talking about it for me, but I think a lot of people that have been in that mopey, horrible, downtrodden mood to walk in onto a room of people that are laughing, and usually laughing at themselves, just find that to be an amazing opportunity for a repeat performance, and it's very helpful.
And much of that was the before and after the meetings.
Yep.
That whole sense of community, it was so much more obvious before or after the meetings, when people were just being honest and true to themselves, and the meetings seemed to just work the opposite. It closed down all that honesty and openness and laughter. I mean, when you're reading the big book at a meeting, reading chapters of the big book in the meeting, there's not much to laugh about, and there's not much of a sense of community at all. It's like going to school, especially for people who are right out of prison or right out of jail. Going to a meeting for trying to find some hope. It all comes before and after the meetings, in my opinion.
I agree that it tends to come before and after. There are some meetings, though, that actually have a majority of very healthy people in them, and you don't get that crap that you're talking about. But I certainly do recognize that there are meetings that are just pure crap, and posturing and whatever, and hierarchical and dictatorial and all of that kind of stuff. And but not all of them are like that, thank goodness. But I agree, it's that before and after. But I mean, then you have a topic, you get to talk about stuff, and you get to argue about stuff, you get to challenge some stuff, you get to ask some questions about some stuff, and you're going to hear good ideas and you're going to hear bad ideas, and slowly but surely you can start doing some critical thinking and figuring it out. I'm not holding my breath for everybody to be able to do that, though. I'm not gonna kid anybody by saying that, because it's not 100% true. Some people just need to be told what to do. They're
Yeah.
either
Right.
too far
And
gone, or they never were far enough along.
well, people that are on the religious end of the spectrum,
Yeah.
right, who are, Bible believers, they call themselves, or whatever it is the hell they say they are, then that traditional program approach that's faith-based, does in fact work for many of them because they buy into it all, just like going to their tabernacle or church or whatever the hell they call it.
Oh,
They
absolutely.
buy in that way. Yeah,
Absolutely.
people like us are never going to buy that
No,
shit.
but then again, you're not
People like us
you're
are
not
doomed if we go that way.
but you're not lazy, John. You're not lazy, Michael. People that want magic are lazy. And it's lazy thinking,
Mhm.
and it's simple,
Yeah.
and it's laid out, and they don't have to do any work. And I think that's the part about
Mhm.
the religious component of it that really upsets me the most. Because if you don't have to do anything, you're not going to get anything.
Right.
It's all
Right.
tenuous.
Well,
Yeah.
well, you got to be willing to invest something in your own recovery.
Absolutely.
In terms of, time, effort, application, etc. Or you're going to have difficulties remaining connected to other people who believe that abstinence is a solution.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll be more prone to be out on the street doing whatever it is you did before, where you found your connection before, right?
True.
Maybe your literal connections before.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a thing. And it's hard for three old white guys to talk to young people coming in off the street who are desperate for one reason or another and may not fully understand the complete nature of the condition.
No, I know. I know. I get
They
that.
don't fully understand the fatality of it. Okay.
Well, I agree with you, but I want to go back. I want to go back a little bit about my upbringing here in terms of how I think things through. Okay, because I am one of those befuddling characters you talk about, one of those long-term Unitarians, and
I can't figure it out. Okay.
no, but
Befuddled or
I want to talk
befuddling?
because I think we
No,
sort of hit
let's
something
hear it.
here. So in the United States, the first major Unitarian minister actually came from England. His name was Joseph Priestley. Okay. Now that's not important to a lot of people, and that's fine. I don't, it doesn't matter. Except Priestley was a unique guy for a lot of different reasons. One, he was a friend of Ben Franklin's, and he wrote the book for the electricians. And he's the one that documented electricity. He's also the guy that discovers oxygen, one of the early founders of the Unitarian Church. He discovers a bunch of other elements. He shares his experience with a guy by the name of Lavoisier, who becomes the father of modern chemistry. This guy did stuff. He did shit. He did the scientific work. He was one of the early guys that did that and had a philosophy in an audience that was so influential. So guys like Franklin, guys like John Adams, guys like Thomas Jefferson all wanted him and all encouraged him to come to their corners in the United States after your radical King Charles guy decides to have a little revolution with you. He chases Priestley out of England. And that's where my family sort of steps in a bit. It was my father's side of the family going back, whatever, 5, 6 generations. We hid him in London and secreted him onto a ship to America. We kept him for a year in the family, apparently, and then sent him off. And on my mother's side, they were the Adams, and they met him from the other side, trying to encourage him to come to Boston Franklin said, no, 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 no. You want to be in Pennsylvania. And Jefferson is wanting him to be in the Washington area in Virginia for the first Unitarian churches in the New World. So that's where it all sort of gets started. He was a deist. He's a next door neighbor to an atheist. He was absolutely all about the human power and the human ability to learn and understand cause and effect and action. And these are the creds that these early guys were all about. They knew that people, if they make a decision, can change things. And they were doing that. And they knew that it wasn't magic. And it's all about getting to the bottom of it and not second guessing it and sending it off. Anyway, it's changed a little bit over time, but these were all just deists that had to live in a Christian-based world and learn to modify their language accordingly. Some of them sounded pretty damn religious, if you ask me, but it was all past tense stuff. Certainly they weren't Jesus people. None of them believed that. That was just, ridiculous. And so you just learn to coexist with these people. You think for yourself, and you understand that it's something you got to do, and you got to learn to do for yourself. And then you do it. And if it's helpful, help somebody else while you're at it, because you probably feel better. Anyway, that's where that comes from, John. And apart from that, there's not a single Unitarian Universalist anywhere in North America that would agree with me. Because that's the one thing they all have in common is they don't agree.
Well, so they don't identify as atheists.
Some will.
Some will.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And some are polytheists. Like we have people literally, will go dancing around the woods and on the right solstices and stuff like that. So we have everything. Right. A lot of ex-Jews or Reformed Jews and Muslims and Hindu. We have little bits of everywhere. And they're all comfortable and they're all welcome. They're just not.
Well, I'm very glad they're all happy, and I'm very glad they all have their community. But there is no church for this atheist.
No,
okay,
and nor should there be.
Zero.
Probably, John.
Nada.
And nor should there for you. That's not how you function.
No, should there?
You don't function that way.
Not needed. Now, I like certain places. Like I one of the best things I did when my children were tiny was to send them to the best preschool in Washington, which is still run by the Quakers. All right. And the Quakers were some of the best people I've ever met. And when they got me to go to one of their things once, and I just loved it because nobody said shit. Okay. Nobody said anything. They just sat there in quiet, which was, that was pretty good.
That's kind of a strict dogma in itself, though, isn't it?
That was quiet. They don't say, if they don't say shit, they don't harm anybody.
Well, they do when they're moved.
You're still. I don't know how long we're going to be around, Larry, but it's going to be a real uphill battle for me to figure out what this church for atheists is all about. I just don't get it. I think it's that kind of ancient social club you're a member of, Larry.
Well, I'm sure there's an element of that in there. There has to be. I think that's true of all organizations anyway.
Right. Well, but in the future, are we going to be able to get rid of these ridiculous monikers and labels like AA for secular people? It doesn't make any fucking sense.
Well, we're only a few decades away from having some AI working some absolutely profound things, and I don't want to make any prediction beyond that.
Well, we don't know if Elon Musk wants to put little chips in your brain. So, that's, don't talk.
Yeah, many years away from that working. So
Yeah. And I'm glad I won't be around when it does work.
yeah,
Okay,
fair enough.
that's one of the things I'll be glad not to see. But
I
I
think
would like
humans.
to see a little more rationality in the recovery community. And you're one of the absolute hallmarks and leaders of that for me, Larry. That's
Well,
why I
thank you.
was so eager to have you on.
Yeah, but I really didn't
Because
want to be.
no, I mean, you just sort of volunteered, though.
No,
I
I
mean, you
fell
volunteered to
into it.
become. Yeah, absolutely. Well, something you dropped out of the sky, Larry. You came right from you
I'm a
came from the
miracle. I'm a
sky.
miracle, John.
You're a living mobile, you know, dual national liberal, I mean, it's just it's wonderful. But we really do need a little bit more rationality in the whole recovery community,
I agree.
which is and I'm hoping the Sober Atheist podcast, in its own tiny way with our small niche audience, can begin to get at some of that more, right? Which is, and I think we're going to be pretty open to having some alternative folks on, not just the strict dogmatic atheists such as myself. Okay,
Well, good.
which you'll notice how polite I've been with you today, Larry,
Well,
and
the
how nice
language
I've
has
been.
been so expletive free.
Yeah, I mean,
Appreciate the price.
well, if you get me talking about certain subjects, then the expletives are automatically generated. But that's not what this podcast is all about today. It's about talking with somebody else with a different perspective who's been instrumental in trying to open this process up for many other people, which you have.
Well,
And
thank you.
you're an interesting guy anyway. I mean, you decided to live life on your terms and you went off and did it. A lot of people just bullshit about living life on their terms and never actually do anything about it. You actually did.
Yes, bravo to you, Larry,
Yeah.
for doing all of that up there in Toronto, man. I mean, it really is profoundly significant for all of us, really.
Right. Even though it involves an illogical premise and the integration with with an alien and hostile organization,
Well,
it was still exceedingly important to do.
we all need to belong somewhere, and no one has a right to say we don't belong there. So that was
Yeah,
There you
well,
go.
the
Yeah.
principle.
that Toronto intergroup that banned you was sort of like, I don't want to compare it to something as profound as what Dr. King did, but sort of for atheists in recovery, it was sort of like a lunch counter in North Carolina. You just, you sat down and said, "We're here. What the fuck are you going to do about it?"
Well,
Now you see, I used an expletive.
there is some similarity, I suppose, in that, but I can honestly say that I've now learned that I am hated all the way around the world, as much as some people have been helped. And I've had
No, but
reports back from the
we
middle of the Pacific Ocean about how desperately I am hated, and that's okay.
all right. Well, we don't hate you, Larry. We think you're a rather nice fellow. Okay. But and this is just another example of us proving that we're not Bolsheviks. We're not out to blow up anybody's sweet Unitarian church, right? Okay.
Okay.
We're actually nice to you people.
Well,
I mean, it's your Unitarianism. I view it sort of like a genetic flaw, Larry. There's no escaping it. It's like it's just what it
it's
is.
a
But you're so
it's a
reasonable.
recessive gene trait.
Well, you talk about community and you talk about hope and you talk about
Mhm.
recovery, and that's wonderful
Yeah.
because that's what we need. I just wish we could get more of our younger friends to that moment of decision. How do we broken down old fellas with decades of sobriety do that? That's a tough one. That's something I'm grappling with in my old age.
I'm
But
hopeful that this internet outreach that we're participating in will increase the participation from younger newcomers. I'm really convinced because they are the internet generation, and it's
right,
going to be a lot easier for them to plug into this and find this alternative to those rooms of AA and NA.
right. Well, but the fact is, we old ones that have the hard knocks and the gray hairs, uh, we're the ones with the experience. Okay,
Mhm.
many times. All right, and how do we share the positive aspects of our experience with others? Like, we know for a fact that if you don't use and you don't drink, you're not going to die of this terrible condition,
Mhm.
right? How do we get that message across?
We do use the power of example. We just keep not
Yep.
drinking. We keep behaving like human beings and be polite the best we can, except when it's inappropriate to do so. Free the
And
expletive.
personally, I'm dropping that whole concept of anonymity. I think it's important to not be anonymous.
I don't think
I
the
think
one.
that restricts
I
the
don't think we
reach.
need that anymore. I don't think the stigma exists the way it did, and so I
Right.
don't think anonymity needs to be there anymore. That's
Yeah.
that's secret hood society crap. There was a time when you could be
Yeah.
ashamed you
Yeah.
were wearing a white hood.
Sure.
Well, remember when they were writing all of that stuff? That was when, alcoholics were stigmatized and addiction was not understood.
Mhm.
And, you were viewed as the lowest scum of the earth. And, every alcoholic was sleeping on the street. They weren't, integrated with society and all of that other stuff. So that was from that time and place. We're not there
Yeah.
anymore.
That's
Yeah.
back when a dipsomaniac was a dipsomaniac.
Right. A
Yeah.
dipsomaniac was a dipsomaniac. And
And attending whoopee parties.
yeah, well, I know what my parents' attitude was toward alcoholics and addicts, and it wasn't good.
Yeah. Oh
Okay.
man.
I'll
I mean,
tell the
it's
last,
still out there. That stigma is
well,
still out there a lot.
let me tell you one story here at the end, and then we'll wind this up. This is the story of how alcoholics were viewed around 1958. My parents we used to go to the Smithsonian a lot, okay? And my parents would drive from the suburbs, and we'd find ourselves on 9th Street Northwest, heading south on 9th Street. And 9th Street in those days still was filled. There was the one burlesque house and a bunch of seedy bars. And there were these lumps on the side of the road. You would look out of the car, and there'd be sort of these gray lumps out on the street in front of the bars. And it looked like people. And I asked my mom one day, we're driving along, and I said, "Who are those people? What's that?" And she said, "Oh, those are the alcoholics. They're very sad and they're very dirty."
Hmm.
And that was the sum total of her remarks. She didn't say anything else. They're very sad and they're very dirty. And, we can be sad, but we're not all dirty anymore. Okay. All right. We're in a different age, and we don't need that religious stuff.
Yeah.
I think we all agree on that, right,
Oh,
Larry?
without question. Without question.
Without question. Okay, well, that's
Yeah.
great. That's community and unanimity.
There you
I
go.
love it. So I think
Unitarian.
we've come to the end of our time here, and Michael and I have a wonderful way of ending these things, or a good way of ending these things, and we'd like you to join in. And what do we say at the end of these things, Michael?
Peace and love.
Peace and love.
Peace and love.
Peace and love. Peace and love to you, Larry.
Thank you.
Thank you. We love you, and you love us, I'm sure. All right. We'll see you. Take care.
Bye.